But in the real world, you get asked really weird questions at the beginning of a project like, what are you going to build? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? How are you going to build it? And the only way you can answer those questions is you've got to do some initial modeling. Yeah, you know, the Agilists love to talk about stacks of requirements, right? Well, where does that stack come from? Does it get beamed down from the Starship Enterprise and magically appear on your desk on Monday morning, the first day of the project? No. You do some initial modeling to get those requirements. We need to talk about this. We need to get better at this. These are basic fundamental things that we need to communicate to the rest of the world what we're actually doing, because it freaks the traditionalists out. What do you mean you're not doing it? Well, yeah, you're using a metaphor to drive your project architecture? Are you crazy? What kind of a nut job would do that? Nobody does that. They get to a whiteboard and they sketch it. Oh yeah, we're doing J2E, and you know, we're going to have this WebSphere thing here, and it's going to talk to Oracle, and you know, whatever the situation is, right? You do some initial modeling. This is normal. Okay? This is what happens. So you do this modeling stuff. During iteration planning, during the planning game, you're doing modeling as well, right? You know, when you're trying to estimate things, you're going to start maybe sketch something on a whiteboard. You whip out the index cards, do some CRC modeling, you know, whatever it takes to understand what that user story is or what that usage scenario is. So you do some initial modeling at the beginning of an iteration. You do model storming throughout the iteration. So you'll be working on something, you'll realize, oh, I gotta, you know, I'll be pair programming or whatever, and I realize, uh-oh, how are we going to build this? So you go to the whiteboard, you go to your index cards or whatever, and you start drawing stuff, right? You think you spend 10 or 15 minutes, you think something through, and then you go back and you spend the next couple hours or next couple days doing test-driven development. Perfectly fine, right? So you use modeling for what it's good at, thinking big issues through. You use test-driven development for what it's good at, thinking the detailed issues through, doing just-in-time design or just-in-time requirements. So the Agile modeling stuff is one of the scaling issues for doing test-driven development. Not such a bad thing. We can also do Agile database stuff. You can, in fact, just like you can refactor your code, you can refactor your database schema, at least a relational database schema. So refactoring and changing an existing relational database schema is absolutely trivial if you choose to make it trivial. Okay? Everybody flicks, oh, well, we couldn't possibly, you know, rename a column, or couldn't possibly split a column in two because we're using it for multiple things because we're going to break 100 apps. Well, there's ways around that. You don't have to be stupid about it, right? So unfortunately, the data community assumes that it's difficult to do database refactoring. So they never got good at it. The Agile community came along and said, you know what, we need to do this. Let's not assume that let's assume that it's easy and figure it out. And you know what, it is in fact easy. So there's some good material out there. I wrote a fairly decent book on this topic. You can do regression testing of your database. It's absolutely criminal, the level of quality we see in the data community. Right now, data quality problems in the United States is a $600 billion a year problem. $600 billion a year. Hillary Clinton's health care plan is $115 billion. I can pay for health care for Americans 5 times over with the amount of money they waste due to data quality problems. Maybe we want to fix it. Maybe we should test the database. Just like we test our application code, why should we not test our database, right? Think about this. We should do continuous database integration. I don't want to be surprised at the end of a project to find out that things don't integrate. Just like I integrate the code running on my app server, I should also be integrating the stuff that's running in my database, including the source data, right? It's a no-brainer. Obvious that this should be happening. So we got to get good at this. So anyways, the Agile community has been doing a fair bit of work around these topics. Because it's no good if the data folks can't work in an evolutionary manner. If they can't react quickly to change, then it's a wash, right? Because you've got to look at the full life cycle. So if you want to add a new feature, or if you want to fix a defect, whatever it is you happen to be doing, it's no good if it takes the application programmers 2 days to fix their stuff because they're doing TDD and they got high quality code, but it takes 3 months to add that column into the database because that's how much fooling around the data guys do, right? It's got to be a couple days at most. So we got to get better at this. So anyways, it is possible if you choose to work that way. The rational unified process has some interesting scaling things for Agile. You know, everybody flips out about phases. It's interesting. If you read the first book on, Kent Beck's book on XP, read the last chapter. He talked about phases. I don't know if anybody's got the book with them, but he talked about phases of XP. And that got dropped because it wasn't a sexy topic to be talking about. But in RUP, we have these different phases. So during inception, I want to say, so what happens is we're risk-driven. We want to drive out the risk. So in the inception phase, you try to drive out most of your business risk. During the elaboration phase, you drive out your technical risk. So at the end of elaboration, I have a working end-to-end skeleton of the system that proves that the architecture works, right? So yeah, yes, things will evolve over time, but the architecture provides the foundation for the system. I want to make sure I get that right. I want to make sure I prove it out. Very simple to do. I don't want to be 9 months into my project and find out my architecture doesn't work. And I've seen Agile teams do this. I've done several Agile rescues now where you go in and you start talking with these guys and it's always, well, yeah, we were going to evolve and we're going to have the courage to do things tomorrow and all that sort of stuff. Well, great, we're a year into the project and you've got to basically start over again because you went off in the wrong direction. You never refactored your way out of it, right? Well, don't make stupid mistakes. Meanwhile, if you'd spent like a day doing a little bit of upfront modeling, you would have avoided all those mistakes. So let's not do that. So anyways, there's some really good stuff there, and it's interesting. The Agile community will give us grief about the RUP, but the fact is we socialized many of the concepts that the Agile community takes for granted, like delivering working software every iteration, like the word iteration, putting testing throughout the life cycle, doing all the programming and modeling all through the life cycle. So there's some good stuff there. And we also take on some of the not so sexy issues as well, like releasing your software into production. That's nasty hard work sometimes, right? Because you got to do data conversions, you got to train your end users, you've got to be able to back up your existing data, restore it if you have to. Deploying software into production is hard stuff sometimes. It's not just just copy it onto the server and hope for the best type stuff. So you got to make this stuff explicit. Starting a project up can also be hard, right? Getting the initial funding, not such a pleasant experience if you've ever had to go hat in hand trying to get a project funded, right? But we never talk about these things. We got to get better at that. Question?
Like we need projects, how does this tapping into continuous development mode?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
So I was asking how would you map this into continuous development mode?
Well, this is continuous development. So the reality is that, so this is all continuous development here, but just because like the Scrum guys and the XP guys don't like to talk about it, the project has to start somehow, right? Like it's like if you read some of the literature, there's this assumption that you've already started. Well, what about get the funding? What about getting the room, getting the people, all that sort of stuff? There's a lot of work there to be done sometimes. If it's easy, well then this is nothing and you're done, right? But if it's not so easy, it's not. Putting stuff into production, and it's interesting, if you look at some of the processes, they talk about gearing down towards the end of the life cycle, so that way you start getting serious about baselining things and then doing the transition work. So if you have an easy deployment, then this is nothing as well. But that's not always the case. So you need to be explicit about these things. So finally, just to end off here, governance. So I was ranting about governance a while ago. So this is something that's absolutely critical in organizations. So if you've got a very small company, it doesn't matter much. But now that we're on the right-hand side of the adoption chasm, the banks of the world, the insurance companies, the government agencies, the mid to large-size organizations, they have to worry about governance. If you've got 40, 50, 500 projects underway every year, you darn well better be looking at the bigger picture, right? Because one of the challenges with Agile is it's far too developer focused and it's far too project focused. So we're unfortunately, a lot of Agile teams are doing a lot of silo development stuff, which is not, from a large company point of view, is not very attractive. So we need to start looking at these bigger pictures. But that doesn't mean we need to be ineffective at it. It doesn't mean we need these big control boards. It doesn't mean we need mounds of documentation. But we do need somebody to be looking at these bigger pictures. So, we have to align our HR policies and our IT values, and as well as our stakeholder policies. It's no good being Agile if your business folks come along and say, I absolutely need a detailed upfront estimate, and I absolutely need a detailed upfront requirements document, which you will sign off on.